I am delighted to introduce my colleague Olivier Fréco here to talk to us on a national wealth approach to financial stability. Olivier graduated from the Political Science Institute in Paris, was then for 14 years at the Bank of France, most of the time as an inspector of finance, and then went to the IMF, to what was then the Monetary and Exchange Affairs Department, and has been in that department since 1992. The department has changed names, has changed directors, changed colleagues, and Olivier's title has changed. He's ascended the hierarchy. But essentially he's worked through, and I think in 44 countries, doing bank restructuring because there have been crises around the world. And in the course of that, he's not only done the countryside, but they take it country by country, but a lot of strategic work. So this is really the basis of his strategic thinking from working in all these. We were together in Mongolia, where we devised the Mongolian Asset Recovery Agency, which Jeff Sachs said was the most efficient bank restructuring ever. And then we were for longer periods in Indonesia, sort of 17 missions over 2 years, which was a bigger exercise, and Olivier's gone on to other things since then. Just to sort of say that the actual talk is on the record, and it's sort of, and then Q&A is Chatham House. So although I'm sure you'll be frank throughout, you'll be especially doubly frank after that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, mon cher Charles. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm going to discuss tonight some issues about further improving our work in the field of financial stability. I will speak frankly, and whatever I will say, do not commit in any way the IMF, its management, or its executive board. These are just my personal ideas. So I will discuss the national wealth approach. First, why? Why a national wealth approach to financial stability? These are the objectives. Then I will describe the components of such an approach. Then we will examine together some preliminary results from this new approach. We will also discuss the challenges that you are facing, and this will lead us to examine the most important, which are the opportunities for the future, before concluding. So let me start immediately about the objectives of the national wealth approach. Well, the key objective is to go further into drawing the lessons from the global financial crisis. And here in St. Anthony, on September 29, there was a conference, Policy Responses to the Great Financial Crisis. So this is a further contribution to this extremely important work in finding ways to continue to further improve our response to the global financial crisis. And there are three specific lessons that are really essential from this crisis, which deserve further attention from all of us. We also want to improve our operational work, because we are practitioners. We have to actually deal with cases of financial instability. So we need to have, there is also a technical component to this approach. So the first key lesson of the global financial crisis is the need to improve our data work. The crisis has brought to light substantial data gap, and we need to improve our work in this field. And the international community has taken a number of initiatives in this field as part of the G20 sponsored data gap initiative that you must have heard about. The second key lesson that we should put to good use is about prevention, is about making sure that the next crisis will not happen. And we've seen in the wake of the global financial crisis that a lot of progress has been done about how to deal with the consequences of the crisis, but far less about prevention. And this is true both on sovereign crisis, and here is an example of a contribution on this, in this field from Reinhardt and Rogoff, where they say the lesson number one is that we've done better on crisis management than on crisis prevention. And this is true also for financial stability. You know, this is let's say, a banking crisis. We've dealt with a number of banking crises over the year. I think we've done that together in the Baltics. When Charles was my boss at the IMF, we did a couple of these. We've done a lot of these. We know we've made a lot of progress. After there is an accident, a casualty, we are able to save more of the uninjured people. We are better to clean up the scene in a better way. But because you have developed methodologies to do that, but on the prevention, we have not done that much progress so far. And the third lesson is about the linkages. And this one is essential. During the global financial crisis, macro-financial negative feedback loops have proved to be totally devastating. When, in practical terms, what are these macro-financial negative feedback loops? Well, it means that because real estate agents are doing a stupid transaction in Florida, a couple of years later, millions of people are going to lose their job all over the world, are going to lose their houses. Well, because the situation of the public finance is unsustainable in a country like Greece, a banking system which was more or less okay would be destroyed. So this is a key phenomenon of the global financial crisis, these linkages between macro and financial. And now we have a universal consensus that these macro financial linkages are critical. This was not the case before. Before the crisis, a number of macroeconomists were discounting financial sector as being a kind of secondary order sideshow. So now everybody agrees that this is critical. But we are still, to this day, facing a challenging issue, which is that macro financial linkages to this day are still not well understood. And this is a point that we will see again. There is a technical impediment in this regard, which is that we don't have an integrated analytical framework to put together the macro and the financial side of the issue. And this has been inhibiting a full understanding of these linkages. Well, my current boss, your former boss, my dear Charles, and a few other people here, you know, was making this point as part of a discussion of what we call the triennial surveillance review in 2014. We still do not understand these linkages. And this was in 2014, but just a few months ago, there was a discussion by the IMF board of the same issue, and they pointed out that there was good progress in this field of macro-financial linkages, but that we are still lacking an integrated analytical framework to link together the financial sector with the other sector of the economy. So, why the National Wealth approach? To address key lessons from the global financial crisis, and also to try to make some progress about building up the needed integrated analytical framework. So now, what are the components? What does this consist of? Well, it relies on national accounting concepts and frameworks. It focuses on net wealth. Where is the wealth of a country? Who is holding the wealth? how is the distribution affected by policies and by development as the analytical anchor. And then it's attempting at overcoming the lack of linkage between macro and financial issues through what I'm calling data bilingualism. Si je parle une autre langue que l'anglais que nous parlons ici, certains vont comprendre, mais d'autres ne comprendront pas. So we need to have a way to find a common language through data bilingualism. And on this topic, this is a topic on which I've been thinking a lot since actually the crisis in Indonesia when Charles was my boss in my mission chief. Actually, we worked on this thing for a long time. And I published last year a working paper at the AMS on this topic, on the national West approach. And then I had the follow-up paper, this one, as part of the work that is being done here in Saint Anthony, which is very, very important. And I've also discussed that with people from the Chinese Academy of Social Science. And they recently published my paper in Chinese. I can understand my name and the number of the paper, but if anybody could tell me if the content is really about this topic, I would be grateful. This was published last month by the States Council Research Center. So, and I've been doing a presentation in a different setting on this topic, and I'm very grateful to Charles and to the European Studies Center for this great opportunity to also discuss this issue with you tonight. As I said, this is based on national accounting, which is really the reference document, and it's a true product from the international community. As you see, we have five authoring institutions, and it's designed to go to the root of the macro-financial analytical segregation. So let's look at this root a little bit. The key point is that the macro analysis and the financial analysis are based on two different conceptual frameworks. The macro is already based on national accounting and concept, whereas the financial sector analysis is based on business accounting and concept. And they rely on two different data languages. The impact of the divergences is underestimated because there is some common vocabulary which is actually misleading. Regarding misleading common vocabulary, you know, we in France, we talk about les faux amis, the false friend. It's the same word, but it's not the same meaning. And then the impact of these differences are far-reaching and grossly underestimated. This is the key point. Let's look a little bit at these differences in more practical terms. On the macro side, national accounting versus the financial or business accounting. The macro accounting is meant for public policy purposes. It's a public good. Whereas the business accounting is designed to measure individual economic entities' entitlement. So it's completely different philosophy, underlying philosophy. So under national accounting, a full symmetry among transactors is required. I'll go back to this point in a second. Whereas no symmetry is required in business accounting. So on national accounting, all the transactions require quadruple entries. And actually, 2 uses and 2 resources. Whereas in business accounting, you have only the double entry principle, which is a debit and a credit. So, and this is another key point. Under macro national accounting, financial transactions by construction, they are wealth neutral. Whenever there is a transaction, there are 4 entries, and there is no impact at all on wealth. Whereas under business accounting, of course, financial transaction can be profitable and generate additional wealth, or losses, of course. So, by construction, in national accounting, all financial assets are equal to all financial liabilities. by construction. Whereas in financial accounting, we can have some what I call orphan financial assets, and I will go back to this key point a little later. So, as an illustration of these differences, let us look at the global balance sheet of the human race as a whole. We, human beings, if we do an aggregated balance sheet for the human race, for this beautiful blue planet, well, under national accounting, the balance sheet would consist of only two items, financial liability and financial asset would be netted out, and we would have only real, non-financial assets, and wealth. Now, if we deconsolidate to the level of nations, in the IMF we have 189 member countries. There are a few that are not members, like North Korea and Cuba and the Vatican. Mm-hmm. But if we want to deconstruct the wealth at the level of nation, well, on this basis, for each nation, the wealth would consist of real assets, plus or minus net claims or liability towards the rest of the world, which is called the net international investment position, a key concept, and of course a balancing item, which is net wealth. And then this wealth can be further deconstructed at the level of economic sector, subsector, and even entities of specific interest. For instance, an inefficient steel mill in China that employs 70,000 people, or a troubled bank in Italy. This deconstruction of the global wealth could be done at that level of economic entities, and this would give you another view, a macro-consistent view of the solvency and wealth position of the concerned entity. So here is the overall approach. Now, what are the first results of this approach? I'm giving it 4 different examples. First one, taking a new look at all cases, revisiting all cases. So the second one is to pinpoint a key distortion accumulation mechanism that can be the root of future crisis. Then identifying ways of improving financial stability discussion in some key country, and I will talk about China in this case very briefly. And finally, trying to outline a stronger crisis prevention agenda. This is the most important thing. We've been discussing, all of us, and thinking day and night about the crisis, what happened. Now we really need to focus on crisis prevention. So, more insight on all crises. Well, it's a case that Charles is very much aware of, since he was in charge of this case, and I was very happy to be a member of his team. This is a case of Indonesia, which is very convenient because it's old, it's cold, and then it's low radioactivity. There are more recent cases, for instance, in Europe. I spent my last 7 years until 95 being involved in a number of cases inside Europe, and these are hot, high radioactivity cases, something that you still cannot manipulate with your bare hands without being burned. So this is the beauty of all cases. And then what the national wealth approach makes possible is to redefine the banking sector losses. Because in the national wealth approach, there are no losses. This concept of losses does not exist. Actually, what we have transfer, which might be live transfer, when they take place at the time of the event, or delayed recognition of gradual past transfer that were opaque before. For instance, when inefficient and unsustainable enterprises were supported by banks, these were actually transfers that were opaque and took place over time. And then, of course, you have some data discrepancy resolution. And so this would make it possible to reassess the impact of the financial crisis response policies. And to this day, this is a database of the systemic banking crisis prepared by some colleague of ours. To this day, Indonesia is still labeled as the most costly case. They might lose this title soon when the database will be updated, but it's still a major crisis. And the crisis was characterized by massive losses under business accounting. Losses that do not exist under macro accounting. And then actually, the government paid for the net cost of the crisis. The banks were recapitalized. As a result, the public debt tripled from 30 to 90% of GDP. And by the end of the crisis, the banking system solvency position was about the same as before the crisis.
Before you go on, can you say, to connect those two sets of numbers, what proportion of GDP is 50 billion? Is
it was about 40%.
Yeah, so it's kind of the same number on the two sides of the page.
40%.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, the bank books horrible losses. They were recapitalized, so then they were fine. But in the meantime, the taxpayer was saddled with a public debt that tripled. Okay? So then, the way the crisis was resolved, this is, in the interest of time, I will go very quickly on that and we can talk more about it during the discussion. But basically, we the financial sector specialists, we came to assess the damage in the banking system, measure it, and send the bill to the taxpayer. And then we moved to another country. Which country was that? Was that Mongolia? No, Mongolia was before. Before. And then we moved to the next country, so the next case. So after having sent the bill to the people in charge of the fiscal issues. So, which means that basically there were some massive and opaque transfer of wealth. And then, actually, I also wrote a paper on this specialized topic. There are also broader papers that were written under the direction of Charles and a number of other people who were observing this thing. But the key point is that as part of the crisis, wealth was not destroyed. We had some anomalies that were corrected, and we had some massive transfer of wealth. And then, if we look, and actually in this article there is an example of this data bilingualism that I was discussing before. But if we look at the GDP of Indonesia, yes, it collapsed, and then it recovered. Gross investment and even net investment collapsed but remain positive. So there is no reason to think that in any way the national wealth of Indonesia was reduced during that period, except for transitory valuation effect, which means that if the country was by and large in the same level of global wealth, the banks were at the end of the crisis in about the same position as they were before, but the taxpayer was poorer by 60% of GDP, so there is a missing component, which means that there were some huge transfers that have not to this day been identified. And so this is the first example of what you can do with a national wealth approach, which is to revisit cold cases to try to dig deeper. Let me go to another point, which is identification of the distortion mechanism. And here in Indonesia is also a useful illustrative example, and there are more recent examples that are a little bit more radioactive that I will not mention, but the principle is the same. The key point is that crises, in a number of cases, are just a final phase of a silent distortion, of silent tension that accumulate a little bit like a volcano, that after tension are building, suddenly it erupts. So crises are often a sudden release of unnoticed, slowly accumulating distortion. And here, the key point is the role of suboptimum investment. Because if we rely on the national wealth approach, suboptimum investment in real economic terms is not investment. It's intermediate consumption. It's not investment as an accumulation of value. It's consumption as an absorption, a destruction of value. And then it leads to GDP overestimation, accumulation of hidden losses in the banks, which at some stage, if the accumulation is too large, will have to face a sudden release, which is nothing else than the active phase of the crisis. If you bear with me a little bit of quantitative detail, let's try to go through an example. So these are the national account as reported. Output 5,000. It's clear to everybody. Then intermediate consumption 2,000. As a result, value added is 3,000. And value added is GDP by construction. The value added by all the economic entities of a given country is just GDP. So then after that, we have value added is distributed to employees as taxes like VAT and things like that. And then after this distribution, the saving is 100. And investment, let's say, would be 1,000, which would need to be funded in addition to the saving by net borrowing of 900. So we have an increase of value of 1,000 and net borrowing of 900. Aha! Now is the problem. The problem is that out of the investment of 1,000, 300 is inefficient. For instance, an airport in Spain, in the middle of the countryside, with a capacity of 2 million passengers a year, with 20 times less passengers. So this is an inefficient investment. Another example is, well, let's say, extraordinary commercial commission. Well, the common term for that is bribes. So there is a petrochemical facility. Its real cost is 700, but then you have 300 of commissions and things like that. So you put it as an investment of 1,000. The real investment is not 1,000. It's only 700. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we need to adjust our national account. Of course, output is still the same, but investment, we put the real number of investment, what is really an accumulation of value, and it's only 700. So if investment is only 700, the 300 have to be reclassified as intermediate consumption. And then, if intermediate consumption is now 2,300, GDP or value added is only 2,700. And then, of course, saving is negative. And then, to finance the investment, you still are borrowing 900. So the bank are actually funding not investment, they are funding an intermediate consumption which is destruction of value. So this is a root case. This is the root case of the root case of the crisis. And if we go back to this thing, what this means, because this is actually what happened in Indonesia, and the Minister of Finance of that time, Bambang Subianto, actually we discussed that this is exactly what he described to us. It means that this very strong growth of GDP followed by a collapse is not the reality. The reality was that the real GDP was growing slower, and then you had a smaller correction at the time of the crisis. So this is the second type of result from the national wealth account approach, which is to pinpoint a key mechanism that is the root cause of a number of systemic banking crises. So now let's look at a third example. Identification of potential for progress in the case of China, which is of course a very prominent case at this time. The key point is to keep in mind that China has done an extremely comprehensive work in the field of the national balance sheet. The Chinese Academy of Social Science, which is one of the largest think tanks in the world, could possibly be the largest one, with I think 15,000 researchers, 32 research institutes. Among all these people, they have a National Institution for Finance and Development, which is one of the 32 institutes. And inside this national institution, they have a research center on the national balance sheet. So they are quite advanced. And this research center has compiled the national balance sheet of the country since the year 2000. The only problem is that their output in English are very limited. They just don't care. They do it for domestic consumption. If they can absorb interesting and thought-provoking idea from the outside, they will keep it. But then they do it for their own purpose. So they translate, if you go to the website of this institution, you will find almost nothing. So a way we have to get a glimpse of what they've done is through a book, a recent book by Andrew Sheng, who used to be at the World Bank. And then he moved to Hong Kong, where he was deputy governor of the Monetary Authority, and then the head of their Securities Commission. And then now he's the chief advisor of the China Bank Regulation Commission. And he's also working on national balance sheet issues with Indonesia. So he's done a lot of work on that, and he has a book on shadow banking in China, but it goes far beyond shadow banking in China. And actually, he says the chapter 3 of this book is about the national balance sheet with a number of tables, a number of details. He sees this chapter 3 as the key point of the book, and actually this is verbatim what he told us in Washington exactly 1 year ago. During the annual meeting, I invited him for a brainstorming session with the China FSAP, Financial Sector Assessment Program team to brainstorm a little bit about our work on China, and this is exactly what he told us. The core of the book is chapter 3 on the national balance sheet. And of course, this national balance sheet can contribute to our ongoing debate about financial stability in China. Because of course, if China explodes, due to the size of China and the ramifications, then we'll be in a completely new world. So the issue of financial stability in China is a core issue for the international community as a whole. And if we look at China's national balance sheet, he has done a comparison with the US flow of fund account that is prepared by the Fed. And then you see the national net asset of China. I will go back to that, but net asset of China, this is in $1 trillion of US dollar. So you can see that between 2011 and 2013, the net worth of the country as reported, before any corrections that would be necessary for their for the quality of their investment. Well, they were increasing their net wealth by $5,000 billion a year. Whereas, in the US, in the wake of the global financial crisis, the net wealth of the country went down. There are some valuation effects here, and which means that by now, 2017, China might well as overpass the US with the largest net national wealth.
Is that the adjusted figures, or the?
These are the figures as reported by the Chinese.
Right. Thanks.
Yes. In the book from Andrew Sheng. Because
they include the adjustment that you talked about a few minutes ago.
The adjustment for the quality investment and things like that? No, they don't. They don't. And then there are a lot of questions about the quality of investment in China. But in China, investment is 43% of GDP. The saving rate of the household is 42, or it might be the reverse. Well, but it's in the 40s. In both cases, so there is a massive accumulation of wealth, and of course, taking a deeper look, and there are a lot of valuation effects. For instance, real estate prices that are rising very fast in the A cities, the larger city. This is translated here, so this would need to be, so this really would deserve a very close review. But from the point of view of a national wealth approach, as compared to the classic business-based view. So, and of course, another of the preliminary result of the national wealth approach is in terms of defining a more comprehensive crisis prevention agenda. And here, and this is of course the key point of the national wealth approach. And here are a few ideas. I think I should accelerate maybe a little bit, Mr. Chairman. But the whole point is that if you take a different point of view, this point of view based on the national accounting, then you can develop a completely new and expanded crisis prevention agenda in terms of risk identification and monitoring, policy responses, and early remedial actions. When you see the first sign, then you can react at an early stage. And here are a few ideas in this regard, regarding ratios, regarding the story of orphan assets. Let me tell you a little bit more about orphan assets. Orphan assets are assets that are reported by an economic entity, but not recognized as a liability by any other economic entity. Under national accounting, this is impossible because of quadruple entry. Under business accounting, it's possible, and it's actually widespread. A key example is that of the Greek bank and their deferred tax assets. The deferred tax assets of the Greek bank represent more than half of their capital base. These are orphan assets, and which means that if you would put them aside, the real capital position of the Greek bank system would be 2 times lower than how it's reported under applicable business accounting. Of course, investment efficiency is another example. Discrepancies. The national wealth approach, by calculating the capital base of the concerned entity from a different point of view, get another number, and then a large range of different discrepancies can be brought to light, which require, of course, a close examination. We can also try to beef up our policy responses, both in terms of liquidity and in terms of solvency. And we can develop early remedial actions by broadening the mandate of the bodies who are in charge of this kind of policies. So these were the 4 directions in which a national wealth approach has already demonstrated a potential to improve our work. At the same time, this approach is also facing a number of difficult challenges. The first one are the valuation issues. Valuation issues, it has been as part of the European crisis, when we had, for instance, to set up this asset management agency in Spain, what would be the transfer price. The valuation issues are really a complex and demanding issue. Other issues are, of course, the lack of timeliness of national accounts, the lack of precision, also the fact that these numbers have no legal status to take action in case of trouble, and then that there is a silo culture that is separating different group of experts that would need to work together. Macroeconomists, statisticians, and financial sector risk. These people, to make progress, really need to work together very closely, and it's quite difficult to get them to have different culture, different references. Now, let me discuss very rapidly opportunities for the future. We've seen what it consists of, what has already been done, so what else can we do in the future in that direction? The first thing we could do is accelerate progress. There is progress, a lot of people are working on these issues, but the progress could be accelerated. Then there are some interesting initiatives that are worth monitoring. The IMF, my employer, could actually do more in this field. There are some opportunities to develop our work. And of course, we could do, in practical terms, and I'll come up with some example, we could look at more closely at some key issues in some key countries. Well, to accelerate the progress, you would need to dismantle the silos. We've already tried to do that. There is still a lot of work to be done in this field. And for instance, national accounting experts with whom we need to, they are bridge builders. This is the new Tappan Zee Bridge, north of New York City.
No.
Strong, beautiful bridge, but it takes 3 years to build. Huh? So when I'm saying about my dear friend national accountant, I talk about them about the triple S, sturdy, systematic, and slow. We, financial sector crisis experts, we are completely different. We are the commandos. We are being parachuted by night in the middle of the battlefield. So we are prepared to provide military-style immediate responses. When you have to decide which bank will be closed, which bank will continue the next morning, we are used to fight in the fog, in the middle of the night. This is what we do. This is a kind of bridge we build overnight, not the new Tappan Zee Bridge over 3 years. And then we are used to deal with deficient and missing data. When you are out, there is no data, so we have to make educated guesses, and you have to rely on heroic assumption, and we are doing it because there is no other choice. And here is an example of what we've done with the corporate sector in Indonesia in June 1997. We can draw broad conclusions that will allow us to develop a policy, an immediate policy response. So we need to converge between this slow bridge builder and us, the commando type, who take immediate and decisive action. The second thing worth looking at is an initiative about what is called a global balance sheet initiative. Actually, the need for a global balance sheet initiative to further develop this approach is the conclusion of my paper. Here. Where is it? This one. Published here. We need a global financial initiative to make further progress. And this is also the keynote presentation that Andrew Sheng, the author of this book about the balance sheet in China, is going to make on November 1st in Jakarta in Indonesia on an international seminar on this thing. So something is brewing. Something is brewing about this global balance sheet initiative. Then, of course, the IMF would expand its surveillance work, particularly in terms of Article 4 coverage and FSAP, to include a component about the national balance sheet approach. Actually, I was able, as part of the China FSAP, to introduce an appendix on a technical note about the quality of the bank's portfolio, describing this approach, and this has led to the publication by the State Council of this article. So it's starting a little.
Yeah, against the Global National Accounting Initiative, and you still don't know the share of sunk investments, right? That's, I guess, because that was a critical component in your crisis
Yes.
view. So how do you make the educated guess about what's the share of sunk investment?
Yes. So about the quality of this investment, this is critical indeed, and we don't have hard data, so we have to proceed with very rough assumptions to get an idea of where we are, knowing that we will not be completely exact. So this is a kind of practice that we've developed by dealing with a banking crisis. For instance, if you have this airport in Spain that is built for 2 million passengers and has 20 times less, then we would just take that as a fraction and consider that 90% of this investment is inefficient. So we won't be able to have something very exact, but you will get a kind of on the order of magnitude. So this is the way we are dealing with this issue. So actually, what we could do, we could, as part of our integrated macro-financial analysis, and this is part of the current priority work of the IMF, we could have national and sectoral balance sheet, and the most important things, so far in the classic macro work, we focus mainly on flows, like GDP, or the budget, and things like that. we also need to focus on stocks, which are the balance sheet, but we need to go one step beyond, which means that we need to build comprehensive stock flow, stock sequences. We start from the stock, from the national balance sheet, then we introduce all the flow concept, GDP, expenses, fiscal expenses, fiscal income, and we get to the new stock position. And we need to have that for the economy as a whole and for each of the 5 main sectors of the economy. So there is a huge field of further development of what we could do. And we could actually add some new tables to the financial programming framework that is used by the IMF country team. So then we could do more in terms of monitoring some key countries. Let me take just 2 countries. The first one is the US. Well, what would be quite interesting would be to revisit this massive reported destruction of value as part of the global financial crisis. Lehman Brothers, 160 billion of assets, massive destruction of value. Under the national West approach, there is no destruction of value. There are transfer and correction of past distortion. So this could give a different view of what happened in the US. The other thing we could do, since the international investment position of the US is deeply negative, and has gone negative from minus 4 trillion to minus 7 trillion in just the last couple of years, this would require more review. And then,
Could you explain that point?
okay, should I explain now?
Are you close to the finish?
I'm close to finishing.
So we just let him finish, which
Okay.
is probably a few minutes to finish, and then
Yeah.
let's take that as the first question.
Yeah. So, and then there is a question of the corporate profitability. And here there is an analyst, he's a distinguished contributor to the Financial Times that some of you might know. His name is Andrew Smithers. And he has done a comparison of the profitability from the main US corporate based on what they report for the stock exchange every quarter and what's the national account where the flow of fund account from the Fed show, and it's completely diverging.
Yeah.
So here there is a real issue. And there is a real issue, and this might be, I don't know, maybe it's not a serious issue, maybe it's a time bomb that will lead to the next financial crisis. So this kind of thing, when we talk about broadened monitoring of some key countries. Now about China, of course, in China, a lot of people, particularly a number of my colleagues at the IMF, are alarmed by the credit, by the expansion of corporate credit. So how dangerous is it really? We need to take a closer look. And these huge buffers that are reported by Andrew Sheck in his book from the Chinese Academy of Social Science, are they accessible as a protection against the crisis? And then if we look, non-financial enterprises, look at how their net wealth has increased. And since they are accumulated a lot of debt, it means that their assets have increased by the accumulation of wealth plus the accumulation of debt, which means that they are massive assets. So then the key question is the quality of these assets. And this is something we don't go that far in our analysis so far, and we should. So this is the second country example of what we could do with this national risk approach. Now let me conclude. The national risk approach is actually, technically, just a component of the broader balance sheet approach, which is based on the national accounting concept, and which is now part of the priority work agenda as part of the integration of macro-financial analysis. The first results are quite encouraging. They are still preliminary, but they are encouraging. And of course, there are some obstacles, some technical obstacles, but there is a lot of potential. And I would assert there are a number of options available for further exploration going forward. Thank you very much for your attention. Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you.